The early morning mist clung to the plains of Plataea, a soft, ethereal veil that seemed to whisper secrets to those bold enough to listen. The air was thick with the mingled scent of damp earth, the resinous aroma of olive trees, and the faint, distant smoke drifting from the encampment fires. Underlying it all was the unmistakable metallic tang of iron, a constant companion to armies on the march. Across the vast horizon, the immense Persian force stretched as far as the eye could see, their lines of spears glinting like 1,000 mirrors, catching the first rays of the rising sun. In stark contrast, the Greek hoplites, clad in bronze armor and radiating a palpable tension, meticulously formed their defensive positions near the shelter of the western hills. This was a day unlike any other. Every soldier felt it in their bones, and every commander understood it in their minds. Plataea was destined to become the stage upon which courage, strategy, and the inexorable hand of fate would collide. Before we get into the main content, please consider subscribing to my channel, giving a like, leaving a comment, and share and support me in bringing more great videos to you. Thank you so much. The Greek generals moved among their men, carefully inspecting the ranks, making minute adjustments to the positioning of shields, and offering hushed instructions. Pausanias, the Spartan commander, moved with quiet, almost understated authority, a man whose very presence commanded respect without demanding it. His sharp, unwavering gaze swept over the formations, ensuring every phalanx, every hoplite, every banner was in perfect order. He knew that even the slightest lapse, the smallest imperfection, could provide the massive Persian army with the opportunity to exploit a fatal weakness. It was a precarious balance, where a single misstep or a momentary lapse in concentration could unravel decades of rigorous discipline in mere minutes. From the vantage point of the eastern ridge, Persian scouts relayed reports of approaching Greek reinforcements arriving from Athens and other allied city-states. Mardonius, Xerxes' most trusted and capable general, was a man known for his meticulous planning and ruthless execution. He meticulously studied the incoming reports, his mind rapidly calculating distances, timing, and the most effective strategies to overwhelm the Greeks before their forces could fully unite. For Mardonius, numbers were paramount. Strategy held importance, but only to the extent that it enabled his overwhelming numbers to crush the relatively small tens of thousands who dared to oppose them. Meanwhile, on the Greek side, the soldiers steeled themselves for the impending battle. They were acutely aware that they were heavily outnumbered. They knew that the Persian cavalry would attempt to encircle them, that Persian archers would rain down a storm of arrows from a distance. Yet, within the iron discipline of the phalanx, in the unwavering unity of their interlocking hoplite shields, and in the unwavering cohesion of their ranks, they found their courage and their confidence. This was not arrogance, but a quiet, steadfast resolve. They understood that Persia's strength lay in its vast numbers, but that Greece's true strength resided in its superior coordination, its rigorous training, and its unyielding determination to defend their homeland and their way of life. The sun slowly ascended in the sky, casting long, dramatic shadows across the plain. The immense Persian army began to move into its prearranged positions, their cavalry forming menacing arcs on the flanks, the seemingly endless infantry lines stretching wide across the field, and the formidable chariots gleaming ominously in the growing light. They patiently awaited the signal, the coordinated push that would, in theory, shatter the Greek center and force a disastrous retreat. Yet, even as the Persian forces maneuvered, the Greeks stood firm, their resolve unshaken. Pausanias and the other Greek commanders meticulously monitored every detail of the Persian deployment. They made subtle adjustments to their own lines, not reacting with panic or haste, but with quiet awareness, anticipating each Persian move before it even occurred. The battle commenced with the first clash at dawn. Persian light infantry cautiously advanced, attempting to probe the Greek lines and test their defenses. Greek archers and slingers responded in kind, peppering the advancing Persians with a hail of arrows and stones, testing their courage and coordination. The initial clash was relatively small, almost imperceptible in the vastness of the battlefield, but it established the rhythm and the tempo for the brutal struggle that was about to unfold. The Persians were undeniably strong, but they were also overextended. Every step forward required meticulous maintenance of formation, and every attack had to navigate the uneven terrain and the subtle, hidden strength of the carefully prepared Greek positions. Soon, the main engagement commenced with a terrifying roar. The Persian infantry surged forward, a seemingly unstoppable wave of bronze and iron, attempting to smash into the Greek lines. The Greeks, standing shoulder to shoulder in perfect unison, raised their heavy shields and braced their long spears. The phalanx presented an almost impenetrable wall of disciplined energy and unwavering resolve. Each soldier was rigorously trained to trust the man beside him implicitly, to move as a single, cohesive body, and to allow the collective strength of the unit to surpass the limitations of any individual. When the Persian infantry finally collided with the Greek line, it was akin to two powerful rivers meeting head-on, one relentless and overwhelming in its raw force, the other unyielding and immovable in its determined resistance. Swords crashed against spears with a deafening clang. Shields splintered and cracked under the tremendous force, yet the seemingly unbreakable wall held firm. Every step forward taken by the Persians was met with carefully measured resistance. Every Greek counterpush was deliberate, intended to weaken the enemy, not to overextend their own lines. Mardonius began to feel a growing frustration. He was accustomed to armies crumbling before his will through the sheer weight of superior numbers. But here, the very ground itself seemed to be aligned with the defenders. Even in areas where the Persian soldiers pushed hardest, the Greeks had anticipated the attack and were prepared. The seemingly flat plain, in reality, held subtle rises and depressions, small tactical advantages that the astute Greek commanders had identified and were now using to their full advantage. By mid-morning, the first waves of Persian casualties began to appear, a grim testament to the ferocity of the fighting. Horses faltered and fell in the thick dust. Infantry stumbled and collapsed against the tightly knit wall of Greek shields. Spears fell uselessly to the earth, either shattered or bent beyond repair. And yet, the Greeks did not celebrate or cheer. Their eyes remained fixed on line, their breathing steady and controlled, and their resolve unshaken. Each death, each injury, served as a stark reminder of the high stakes of the battle. This was not merely a fight for land, but a fight for the very survival of their city-states, for the integrity of their people, and for the fundamental principles that bound them together. Amid the chaos of battle, stories began to circulate among the Greek ranks in hushed whispers. Tales of comrades who held their ground despite overwhelming odds, of single warriors who displayed extraordinary brilliance and courage, and of small units who turned aside much larger forces through clever maneuvers and unwavering determination. It was not heroism in its loudest, most boastful form, but in the quiet, steadfast determination of men who knew what had to be done, who understood the immense responsibility they bore on their shoulders. The phalanx moved as a single, unified entity. Yet within it, individual acts of courage still shone brightly, like individual stars embedded in a vast constellation. As the long day wore on, the battle ebbed and flowed, a relentless cycle of attacks and counterattacks. Persian generals repeatedly attempted to break the Greek line by flanking maneuvers, by feigned retreats, and by concentrating their forces at seemingly weak points in the Greek defenses. Yet, the Greeks adapted and adjusted, shifting their formations without losing cohesion, responding to each new threat as if guided by instinct rather than explicit command. The air grew thick with choking dust, with the piercing cries of combatants, and with the acrid, metallic scent of bronze and iron. The ground shook violently under the relentless pounding of countless feet and hooves. And through it all, the Greeks held firm, their formation a living, breathing organism of unwavering discipline and unbreakable resolve. By late afternoon, a subtle but significant shift began to become apparent. The Persian cohesion began to falter under continuous pressure. The numerical advantage, which had once promised an easy and decisive victory, gradually transformed into a liability. The treacherous terrain worked against them. The iron discipline of the Greek phalanx held firm, and the relentless fatigue began to wear away at the edges of their formations. Small gaps began to appear in the Persian lines, leading to confusion and disarray. Officers shouted orders, but the deafening noise and sheer chaos of the battle often drowned them out. And still, the Greeks pressed forward cautiously, exploiting every hesitation, every misstep, and every crack in the Persian advance. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the battlefield. Plataea had become a theater of relentless struggle, a place where strategy, courage, and human endurance met in a deadly dance. The first day of battle was drawing to a close, but its lessons, its underlying tension, and its quiet horrors would remain etched in the memories of the men who fought there for years to come. They had withstood the full pressure of a seemingly unstoppable force. They had tested their own limits, and they had glimpsed the fragile shape of victory, a shape that demanded every ounce of their strength, every spark of discipline, and every beat of their hearts. As night slowly approached, a brief and uneasy lull fell over the blood-soaked plain. Soldiers, utterly exhausted and battered but unbowed, maintained their defensive lines, keeping a vigilant watch for renewed attacks, listening intently to the subtle sound of movement that might indicate Persian repositioning. The field was scarred and ravaged, but it was still held by the Greeks. And in that quiet, almost surreal moment, there was an almost imperceptible sense of hope. For though the battle had not yet been decisively won, the seeds of ultimate triumph were slowly being sown. Quietly, meticulously, and inexorably. The morning air carried a subtle chill, as the Plataea itself was reminding both armies that the day ahead would test not only their physical strength, but also the very depths of their hearts. The plain, stretching far into the horizon, shimmered faintly under the rays of the rising sun, the dust from campfires and countless horses mingling with the scent of damp grass. Greek and Persian forces eyed each other warily across the vast distance, an invisible line drawn in the air, charged with tension and anticipation, while commanders whispered last-minute instructions to their subordinates, their voices calm yet laced with a sense of urgency. Pausanias, positioned at the center of the Greek line, surveyed his troops with a quiet intensity. Every shield was aligned perfectly. Every hoplite stood ready for action. He understood that discipline, flawless coordination, and unwavering patience would be their most valuable weapons against the overwhelming Persian numbers. Behind him, younger soldiers murmured fervent prayers to Athena and Zeus, seeking courage and strength not only in themselves but also in the favor of the gods. Each breath seemed heavier than the last, but also sharper, more focused, as though the air itself was charged with the impending confrontation. On the Persian side, Mardonius moved among his generals, reviewing formations and issuing final orders to the cavalry units poised and ready on the flanks. He had made a thorough study of Greek warfare and held a healthy respect for their renowned discipline, yet he still firmly believed that the sheer weight of numbers would ultimately decide the outcome of the day. Persian chariots lined the edge of the plains, their bronze fittings glinting menacingly in the morning light, while the vast infantry braced themselves for the imminent push forward. The Persian army was immense, a living sea of spears and shields, ready to sweep across the plains of Plataea and crush the smaller Greek force. An air of confident expectation radiated from every commander, yet beneath it lay the silent, ever-present tension of uncertainty. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, small skirmishes began to erupt at the edges of the lines. Light infantry from both sides cautiously tested each other's positions, exchanging volleys of arrows and throwing javelins. The ground shook under the relentless movement of men and horses. The rhythm of battle was beginning to take shape, almost imperceptibly at first, a subtle pulse that foreshadowed the coming storm. Greek hoplites maintained their compact phalanx, advancing in perfect unison, while Persian soldiers attempted to exploit any perceived openings, only to encounter a level of resistance that seemed far greater than its physical size. A pivotal moment arrived mid-morning, when the first truly coordinated assault was launched. The massive Persian infantry surged forward in disciplined columns, pressing relentlessly against the Greek center. The phalanx braced itself, their shields overlapping to form an impenetrable wall, their long spears pointing forward like a dense forest of bronze spikes. The impact was instantaneous, a violent collision of humanity and steel, each man testing the strength and the will of the other. Shouts of defiance and pain rose into the air. Swords clanged against spears with deafening intensity, and the very ground seemed to vibrate under the combined weight of disciplined men and the chaotic movement of battle. In the midst of this swirling chaos, the Greek generals demonstrated both exceptional tactical brilliance and the quiet, unwavering patience that comes from long experience. Pausanias signaled small units to shift subtly, redirecting pressure points, and closing any gaps before they could be exploited. Reinforcements from other city-states moved cautiously to fill any spaces in the line. Each maneuver, though seemingly small and insignificant on its own, contributed to building a foundation of resilience, gradually wearing down the larger Persian formation. Every advance made by the Persians was met with measured Greek resistance, carefully calibrated to inflict maximum damage while conserving their own strength. Meanwhile, the Persian cavalry attempted to outflank the Greeks, circling wide to strike at the perceived weaker edges of the Greek formation. Yet, the Greeks had anticipated this maneuver, forming secondary defensive lines and utilizing natural terrain features, rises, small ridges, and uneven ground, to disrupt the speed and coordination of the Persian horses. The impact of these subtle interventions was clearly visible. Some Persian horses faltered and fell, riders were thrown from their saddles, and entire units became disordered and disorganized before they could even reach the main Greek line. The phalanx proved to be adaptable, not rigid. It responded with precision to every emerging threat, effectively transforming the very landscape itself into a valuable ally. The fierce clash continued for hours, a relentless push and pull across the vast plain. Dust filled the air, carried by the wind and the constant movement of men, while the pain cries of the wounded mingled with the rhythmic cadence of battle commands. Arrows fell like rain, yet the sturdy Greek shields deflected the majority of them, and the determined hoplites pressed forward steadily. In small, isolated pockets of battlefield, acts of extraordinary heroism stood out. A lone soldier holding the line against several enemies, a group of Marines charging fearlessly to protect a vulnerable flank, coordinated maneuvers that transformed potential disaster into an opportunity for victory. These individual acts of courage coalesced into a collective momentum that gradually shifted the balance of power. By late afternoon, signs of growing fatigue began to appear in the Persian lines. Coordination weakened as units strained to maintain formation under the relentless pressure. Mardonius attempted to rally his faltering forces, issuing fresh orders and dispatching cavalry to reinforce weak points, but communication was severely hampered by the surrounding chaos of combat. The Greek line, though equally battered and worn, retained its structural integrity, discipline, cohesion, and morale. The invisible strengths of the phalanx ultimately outlasted the sheer numerical advantage of the Persian army. In the very center of the battlefield, a critical engagement began to unfold. The Greeks, maintaining their compact phalanx, began to push forward incrementally against the Persian columns. Every step forward was calculated. A small shift to open up space, a precise thrust of the spear, a subtle rotation of shields. The Persian infantry, exhausted and stretched thin, found themselves unable to respond cohesively. Units collided with each other. Some faltered and broke, and a sense of hesitation began to spread rapidly. The Greeks seized upon this opportunity, advancing steadily while maintaining the structural integrity of their formidable formation. High above the battlefield, observers noted the subtle yet unmistakable shift in momentum. The Persian lines, once imposing and relentless, began to show cracks. Their immense numerical advantage had begun to work against them, creating pockets of disorganization and confusion. Meanwhile, the Greeks pressed on with a quiet, relentless determination. Small victories within the larger battlefield, a repelled flanking maneuver, a captured banner, a retreating unit, built confidence and inspired even greater effort. It was not merely a grand spectacle of isolated heroism, but the cumulative effect of careful strategy and unwavering, disciplined courage. As evening approached, a temporary lull fell over the vast plain. Dust hung heavy in the air, mingling with the smoke from scattered fires and the sharp, metallic scent of blood. Both armies paused momentarily, catching their breath, repositioning themselves where possible, and carefully assessing the overall situation. The Persian army, though still immense in size, now faced a Greek force strengthened not by numbers, but by unity, experience, and unwavering focus. For the Greeks, survival and ultimate victory were inextricably intertwined. Each small advance represented a beacon of hope. Each setback served as a stark reminder of exactly what was at stake. Night descended gradually, casting long, ominous shadows over the battlefield. Plataea lay scarred but unbroken. The day had tested both sides to their absolute limits. It had revealed extraordinary courage, ingenuity, and discipline, as well as the subtle interplay of strategy and pure chance. Both commanders in both armies were profoundly changed by the experience. And even in that quiet hour before total darkness, the seeds of ultimate triumph were being sown. The Greeks had endured, and the momentum of courage was beginning to subtly shift in their favor. Tomorrow, they would resume the seemingly endless struggle, armed with valuable lessons learned, their resilience fortified, and with a growing sense of inevitability taking root deep within their hearts, that their unwavering resolve, more than mere numbers, could ultimately decide the fate of nations. The morning sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm but unrelenting light over the plains of Plataea. The Greek lines were no longer merely static formations of soldiers. They had become a living, breathing organism, responding as one to the constant ebb and flow of battle. The very air vibrated with the sound of marching feet, the clashing of bronze shields, and the muffled cries of men both determined and desperate. Dust swirled around the feet of the hoplites, rising in ghostly clouds that seemed to mirror the palpable tension of the fighting. The Persian army, immense in scale and diverse in its composition, continued to press forward relentlessly. Mardonius rode along the lines, issuing orders, adjusting deployments, and striving to coordinate attacks that would finally break through the seemingly impenetrable Greek center. Chariots raced along the flanks, attempting to exploit any perceived weak points, yet the Greeks anticipated every movement with uncanny precision. The phalanx, trained in unwavering discipline, shifted subtly to counter each assault, a testament to both the extensive experience of its commanders and the unwavering cohesion of its soldiers. By mid-morning, the battlefield had transformed into a theater of relentless tension. Small, elite groups of Persian infantry attempted to isolate sections of the Greek line, seeking any opening to pierce the organized wall's shields. Yet each attempt was met with a calculated, precise resistance of the hoplites. Spear met spear with a deafening clang. Shields collided with bone-jarring force. For every Persian advance, the Greeks found a way to absorb the pressure and maintain their unshakable formation. Each soldier understood that personal valor alone was insufficient. Survival and eventual victory depended entirely on collective effort. On the western flank, the Spartans were particularly resolute and unyielding. Pausanias moved silently among his men, calmly observing their performance, offering brief words of encouragement, and reinforcing positions whenever necessary. Even the younger soldiers, initially hesitant under the overwhelming shadow of the Persian numbers, began to display remarkable discipline. They adeptly adjusted to the varied terrain, exploiting small rises and depressions, and utilizing every advantage offered by the very earth itself to strengthen their defensive positions. It was here in these subtle actions that the Greeks' advantage over the numerically superior Persians became undeniably clear. Meanwhile, the Athenian forces played a critical role in harrying the Persian units that attempted to outflank the main Greek line. Their superior mobility and agility allowed them to disrupt the cohesion of the enemy units, forcing Persian soldiers into confusion and creating openings for the Spartans and allied contingents to exploit to their full advantage. Coordination among the Greek city-states was not merely a matter of following orders. It was a deep, shared understanding born of necessity, a silent communication that linked every movement of one contingent to another. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the oppressive heat and the sheer physical exertion began to weigh heavily on both sides. The Persian soldiers, though vast in number, began to exhibit telltale signs of growing fatigue. Chariots slowed perceptibly. Cavalry lost momentum, and infantry cohesion wavered under the relentless pressure of the seemingly unbreakable Greek phalanx. The terrain, meticulously studied by the Greek commanders, compounded their already considerable difficulties. Each step forward required more energy than the previous one. Each maneuver demanded greater focus, and every small misstep risked total disarray. By afternoon, a crucial turning point began to emerge. Greek units, small, highly disciplined groups of hoplites and allied troops, launched a series of carefully coordinated counterattacks. They targeted specific Persian weak points, collapsing extended lines and forcing sections of the enemy into utter disorder. Mardonius attempted desperately to rally his faltering forces, but the chaos spread faster than any command could be effectively executed. The Persian army's sheer size, which had once seemed its greatest strength, now became cumbersome, creating fatal vulnerabilities that the Greeks exploited with disciplined precision. Within the very center of the battlefield, intense fighting erupted with renewed ferocity. Bronze shields clanged violently against one another. Spears splintered into countless fragments, and men pushed forward with quiet, almost terrifying ferocity. The air was thick with swirling dust and sweat, punctuated by the occasional triumphant cry, or agonized scream. Yet amid the swirling chaos, the Greek soldiers moved as one, an almost perfectly synchronized machine. They did not charge recklessly, nor did they retreat in a state of panic. Every movement was meticulously calculated. Every action part a larger, carefully orchestrated rhythm that bound hundreds of individual decisions into a coherent, unstoppable strategy. It was a masterful orchestration of human endurance, extraordinary courage, and superior tactical intelligence. On the flanks, the Persian cavalry struggled valiantly to break through the Greek lines. Some attempted to maneuver through terrain that was exceedingly difficult to navigate at speed, while others faced determined Athenian or Corinthian infantry who intercepted them with perfectly timed counterattacks. Horses stumbled and fell, riders were thrown from their saddles, and chariots were rendered utterly ineffective. Each setback contributed to the growing sense among the Persian troops that the Greeks were not only resisting their attacks, they were dictating the very terms of engagement. By late afternoon, the momentum of the battle had subtly but decisively shifted. The Greeks' disciplined phalanx, combined with timely counterattacks and fierce flanking resistance, had forced key Persian units into retreat or utter disorganization. Mardonius, once supremely confident in his overwhelming numerical superiority, watched helplessly as his carefully laid plans began to unravel before his very eyes. Communication failures compounded the surrounding chaos, and scattered units began to withdraw under intense pressure, leaving gaping holes for the ever-vigilant Greek forces to exploit even further. As shadows lengthened across the vast plains, the battlefield became a complex mosaic of strategic movements, small but significant victories, and weary endurance. The Greek commanders expertly assessed the unfolding situation, adjusting orders and reinforcing critical points with practiced ease. The soldiers themselves, though utterly exhausted, drew strength from the visible effects of their tireless efforts. Each successful push against the Persian lines, each hard-fought defense, reinforced not only their position, but their growing confidence. They could sense, deep in their hearts, that the tide of battle was slowly but surely turning in their favor. Evening approached, and a temporary lull settled over the ravaged plains of Plataea. Dust hung heavy in the fading light, mingling with the pungent smoke from scattered fires and the sharp, metallic scent of blood. Both armies paused, catching their breath and tending to their minor injuries. Yet the underlying tension remained palpable. The Greek forces, though undeniably battered, retained their essential cohesion and readiness, while Persian units reeled under the cumulative effects of constant pressure and growing internal confusion. The battle, far from being over, had revealed the central, undeniable truth of Plataea, that unity, unwavering discipline, and unshakable resolve can indeed withstand even the most overwhelming force. In that quiet moment before night fell, commanders and soldiers alike contemplated the day's momentous events. Small acts of individual courage, tactical brilliance, and sheer human endurance had fundamentally reshaped the battlefield. The Greek army had definitively proven that superior skill, meticulous preparation, and unwavering determination could ultimately tip the balance against a seemingly insurmountable foe. Yet they also knew that the long struggle was far from being complete. Plataea would demand another day of unparalleled endurance, brilliant strategy, and unwavering courage. Another day that could ultimately decide the fate of entire city-states. The dawn broke over Plataea with a quiet intensity, the air heavy with anticipation, and a pervasive scent of scorched earth from the previous day's intense skirmishes. The vast battlefield had been subtly transformed overnight. Paths worn deep into the soil by countless feet, shattered weapons scattered across the landscape, and the subtle marks of hundreds of thousands of footsteps etched into the very fabric of the plain. The Greek army, though utterly exhausted from the previous engagements, stood ready to face the coming challenge. Their phalanxes were carefully adjusted, any minor gaps reinforced, and every single man fully understood the critical nature of the day that lay ahead. They had endured the initial onslaught, and now they were preparing for the culmination of the long and arduous struggle. Pausanias walked slowly along the lines, calmly observing his weary troops. His very presence radiated a sense of calm authority that steadied the nerves of the soldiers. every seasoned hoplite. Every younger soldier still untested in the heat of battle knew that their discipline would once again be tested to its absolute limits. The Spartans, steadfast and unyielding, were flanked by contingents from other allied city-states, each bringing to the field their own unique skills and hard-won experience. Despite the inevitable differences in training and specific tactics, there was a shared understanding among them. The essential unity of the Greek forces was far more vital than any single act of individual valor or heroism. Superior strategy and flawless coordination were their most effective shields against the overwhelming Persian numbers. From the eastern side of the vast battlefield, the massive Persian army began to stir, still enormous and imposing in its sheer scale. Mardonius, fully aware of the extraordinary Greek resilience displayed on the previous day, was forced to adjust his overall strategy. He now sought to deliver a decisive blow, a concentrated assault that could finally pierce the seemingly unbreakable Greek center and shatter their morale once and for all. The Persian cavalry and the dreaded chariots were carefully repositioned, while the heavily armored infantry units were ordered into tighter, more formidable formations. The sheer scale of the Persian army was undeniably daunting. Yet the Greeks had somehow managed to transform their familiar fear of overwhelming numbers into a quiet, almost steely confidence. They had personally witnessed the power of perfect coordination triumphing over raw size and brutal force, and they were now fully prepared to rely on that same hard-earned lesson once again. As the long morning progressed, small, intense skirmishes flared up across the battlefield. Light infantry from both sides probed the opposing lines, exchanged volleys of arrows, and tested any weaknesses they could find. The Greeks skillfully utilized the varied terrain, positioning their archers and slingers on elevated ground to disrupt the carefully planned Persian advances. Every maneuver was deliberate, carefully calculated to maximize its potential impact without overextending their limited resources. The Persian forces, while incredibly vast, were finding that their sheer size hindered their overall flexibility. Orders were often delayed, coordination faltered, and individual units risked overlapping or leaving critical gaps in their lines. Every moment of hesitation or misstep became an immediate opportunity for the ever-vigilant Greeks to exploit to their full advantage. By mid-morning, the main engagement began in earnest, with renewed ferocity. The Persian infantry surged relentlessly toward the Greek center with disciplined force, attempting to finally breach the seemingly impenetrable phalanx. Shields collided with deafening force. Spears met shields with a sickening crunch, and the very ground seemed to tremble under combined weight of countless men and horses. The Greeks responded with calculated precision, holding the line with unshakable resolve and executing subtle counter-movements that cleverly funneled the attackers into carefully prepared zones of maximal resistance. Each Greek soldier trusted the man standing beside him implicitly, creating a seamless wall of unity that was exceedingly difficult to penetrate, regardless of the pressure exerted by the Persian assault. On the flanks, the Spartans and their allied contingents managed to execute several critical defensive maneuvers with remarkable efficiency. The Persian cavalry attempted to encircle them, but the superior Greek positioning and their quick, precise reactions repeatedly thwarted their attempts. Horses faltered and stumbled over the uneven ground. Riders struggled desperately to maintain their formation, and the swift chariots lost their forward momentum. These small, isolated victories, while tactical in nature, had profound psychological effects on both sides. The Greeks gained even greater confidence in their abilities, while the Persians began to sense that their overwhelming numbers might not easily translate into the decisive victory they had confidently expected. Throughout the late morning and early afternoon, the fierce battle evolved into a series of intense, highly localized clashes. Individual units of hoplites engaged small groups of Persian soldiers, skillfully exploiting any perceived vulnerability. The spearmen formed effective wedges to push back the Persian lines, while the archers and slingers targeted key enemy positions with deadly accuracy. Communication across the expansive battlefield presented a significant challenge. Yet the Greek commanders skillfully navigated it using a combination of pre-planned strategies and carefully executed signals. Coordination emerged as the invisible yet vital thread that bound the army together, enabling a swift and effective response to every Persian attempt to regroup and launch counterattacks. As the day wore on, fatigue became an increasingly critical factor. Soldiers on both sides felt the relentless drain of continuous combat, a strain that tested their very limits. However, the Greeks, bolstered by their rigorous preparation and unwavering discipline, managed to maintain their cohesion. Their phalanx was more than just a formation. It was a living, breathing organism, adaptable and responsive, capable of absorbing immense pressure while steadfastly retaining its structural integrity. Despite their numerical superiority, the Persians began to show unmistakable signs of weariness. Their repeated attempts to breach the formidable Greek center or encircle their flanks consistently failed to yield any meaningful results, and even minor mistakes quickly escalated into larger, more debilitating vulnerabilities. As the afternoon approached its zenith, the Greek forces began to seize the initiative with growing confidence. With the Persian line stretched thin and strained from their relentless attempts to overpower the center, coordinated Greek pushes forced several key sections into disarray. Isolated units faltered, and a palpable sense of panic began to ripple through parts of the once imposing Persian formation. Mardonius made a valiant attempt to rally his faltering troops, yet the cumulative weight of the preceding hours and the unwavering resilience of Greeks made any real recovery increasingly improbable. The phalanx moved forward methodically, ruthlessly exploiting every hesitation, every error, every opportunity presented by the increasingly beleaguered enemy. In the center of the conflict, the intensity reached its absolute peak. Shields splintered and cracked under the strain. Spears bent or shattered upon impact, and every step forward became a grueling struggle against sheer exhaustion and the unrelenting force of the enemy. Yet, the Greeks pressed on with almost serene determination, fully understanding that victory would not be achieved through individual acts of heroism alone, but through collective endurance and precise, coordinated action. Drawing upon hidden reserves of strength, the soldiers were spurred on by the subtle, yet significant successes unfolding around them. The rhythm of combat, which had once felt chaotic and unpredictable, now possessed a distinct sense of inevitability. The Greek army was undeniably gaining the upper hand. As evening neared and shadows began to lengthen, the battlefield transformed into a stark tableau of both triumph and profound struggle. The Persians, increasingly disorganized and demoralized, began to retreat in scattered groups, while the Greeks consolidated their hard-won gains and reinforced their newly secured positions. Communication between commanders remained absolutely essential. Every minor adjustment could potentially mean the difference between holding the line and allowing vital Persian units to regroup. The air hung heavy with dust, acrid smoke, and the metallic tang of blood. But amidst it all, a palpable sense of momentum had irrevocably shifted in favor of the Greeks. By nightfall, the battlefield lay partially shrouded in shadow, with the Greek forces maintaining their cohesion and diligently preparing for the next day's inevitable challenges. They had successfully withstood the overwhelming numbers of the Persian army, demonstrating beyond any doubt that discipline, unity, and strategic foresight could decisively tip the balance of power. The long day had rigorously tested their endurance, their courage, and their collective intelligence, leaving an indelible mark on the memory of every soldier who had participated. Plataea had become a crucible, a proving ground that demonstrated what could be achieved when meticulous preparation met opportunity, when small contingents acted as a single, unified force, and when unwavering resolve challenged what had initially seemed to be insurmountable odds. The final day of battle dawned over Plataea with a muted yet palpable intensity. The plain was scarred and ravaged from the previous engagements, dust mingled with bloodstains, and the faint smoke rising from smoldering fires served as a stark reminder of the relentless struggle that unfolded. Soldiers emerged from their makeshift camps, tending to minor wounds, meticulously adjusting their shields, and mentally steeling themselves for what would inevitably be the culmination of days of almost unimaginable endurance. Every breath was carefully measured, every movement deliberate and purposeful. The Greeks fully understood that ultimate victory demanded both unwavering patience and absolute precision, and that the Persians, despite their overwhelming numbers, were ultimately vulnerable to cohesive and disciplined resistance. Pausanias moved silently among his men, his mere presence lending a sense of reassurance and calm determination. The Spartans, who formed the very core of the Greek defense, were flanked by contingents from Athens, Corinth, and numerous other allied city-states. Communication between the various units, facilitated by carefully planned signals and prearranged strategies, ensured that even those positions that were geographically distant could coordinate effectively. Each soldier fully grasped the high stakes involved. This battle was not simply a contest of arms, but a decisive moment that would ultimately determine the fate of their homelands and the very balance of power throughout Greece. The Persian army, immense and undeniably imposing, prepared itself for one final all-out push. Mardonius, driven by a fierce determination to secure a swift and decisive victory, concentrated his forces in a coordinated assault, attempting to overwhelm the seemingly impenetrable Greek center, while simultaneously deploying his cavalry to strike with brutal efficiency at the flanks. Chariots, gleaming menacingly in the morning sun, maneuvered into their designated positions. Infantry tightened their ranks, and the officers bellowed orders that echoed ominously across the vast plain. The Persian confidence was palpable, yet beneath the surface lay a distinct undercurrent of tension and uncertainty. Experience had taught their commanders, often through bitter lessons, that the Greeks were far more resilient and resourceful than they initially appeared. As the day progressed, the initial clashes served to set the tone for what was to come. Light skirmishes tested both sides' positions. Arrows and javelins flew in graceful arcs across the sky, and both sides continuously adjusted their formations in response to the ever-changing dynamics of the battle. The Greeks, skillfully anticipating maneuvers and expertly exploiting the natural terrain, maintained their cohesion and absorbed the immense pressure with remarkable efficiency. Every aggressive push by the Persians was met with controlled resistance, carefully calculated counterattacks, and strategic adjustments that successfully minimized casualties, while simultaneously maximizing the disruption of enemy formations. The phalanx, a disciplined wall of interlocking shields and bristling spears, became a living, breathing symbol of Greek unity and unwavering determination. By mid-morning, the main engagement erupted in all its terrifying force. Persian infantry advanced in dense, seemingly endless columns, relentlessly seeking to pierce the seemingly impenetrable Greek line. The clash was thunderous, a symphony of metallic clang and desperate motion. Shields splintered and cracked, spears collided with brutal force, and the dust rose in choking clouds that obscured the very sun. Yet the Greeks held their ground with unwavering resolve, each soldier trusting implicitly in his neighbor, each coordinated movement reinforcing the cohesion of the whole. The rigorous discipline that carried them through preceding days now emerged as a decisive factor, as the Greek phalanx absorbed blows that would have shattered any less organized force. On the flanks, the Spartans and their allied contingents executed carefully timed maneuvers to effectively counter the Persian cavalry in their relentless attempts to outflank the center. Horses stumbled and fell upon the uneven terrain. Riders were unseated and flung aside, and the chariots became increasingly ineffective as the Greeks skillfully exploited the terrain and maintained their disciplined formations. Each tactical success, though seemingly small and insignificant in isolation, compounded across the battlefield, gradually eroding both the confidence and the overall cohesion of the Persian army. Momentum, which had initially favored the numerically superior force, began to shift unmistakably toward the Greeks. By afternoon, the pressure mounted decisively. The Persian infantry, having endured hours of relentless resistance, began to falter noticeably. Gaps began to appear in their once imposing formations. Units withdrew or hesitated at critical moments, and communication across the vast army became increasingly difficult and unreliable. Greek commanders, sensing the shift in momentum, seized upon these emerging weaknesses, directing concentrated pushes to exploit the growing disarray. Hoplites advanced in precise, wedge-shaped formations. Counterattacks targeted vulnerable positions with ruthless efficiency, and the collective effect of their disciplined coordination inflicted a disproportionate impact on the much larger force. Amidst the chaos and carnage, individual acts of courage illuminated the battlefield like beacons of hope. Soldiers held their lines against overwhelming odds. Small groups executed daring maneuvers to protect vulnerable flanks, and leaders inspired those around them through their calm resolve and unwavering determination. These moments, while undeniably human and deeply emotional, were seamlessly integrated into the larger strategic picture. The Greek soldiers understood that acts of individual heroism alone could not win the day. Cohesion, unwavering patience, and the ability to adapt to the ever-changing circumstances of the battle were the true keys to ultimate triumph. Every success, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, built upon previous efforts, steadily reinforcing both morale and overall momentum. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the battle reached its dramatic climax. The Persian army, stretched thin, disorganized, and utterly exhausted, could no longer maintain coordinated attacks. Units scattered in panicked disarray, some retreating in confusion, others isolated and quickly overwhelmed by Greek counteroffensives. The Greeks, though themselves tired and battered, pressed methodically forward, consolidating their hard-won gains and ruthlessly exploiting every opportunity that presented itself. Victory was becoming tangible, not in a sudden, dramatic flash of triumph, but in the slow, inexorable shift of initiative and overall control. By evening, the battlefield of Plataea had been utterly transformed. The Persian army, once a seemingly unstoppable tide, lay broken in scattered pieces, retreating in complete disarray. The Greek forces, maintaining their cohesion and unwavering discipline, stood victorious. The struggle had been immense, testing their endurance, their courage, and their strategic acumen to their absolute limits. Yet through meticulous preparation, unwavering unity, and unyielding resolve, the Greeks had decisively demonstrated that even overwhelming force could be effectively countered by intelligence, precise coordination, and sheer determination. As night fell over the ravaged plains, the survivors tended to the wounded, gathered up abandoned arms, and warily observed the retreating enemy. The field, though scarred and forever marked by immense sacrifice, symbolized not only the decisive end of Persian dominance in that particular engagement, but also the enduring strength and resilience of the Greek city-states when united in common cause. Plataea had unequivocally proven that courage, discipline, and strategic foresight could overcome what had initially seemed to be insurmountable odds, and that the bonds forged in shared struggle could ultimately define the very course of history. In the profound silence of the night, the lingering echoes of battle served as a poignant testament to human resilience, strategic brilliance, and the quiet heroism of ordinary soldiers rising to meet extraordinary challenges.